Hello, I'm Linda Elder. I'm the president of the Foundation for Critical Thinking. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Gerald Nosich. Hello, Gerald.
Hi, Linda. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you as always. Gerald is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Critical Thinking. And we are focused in this series on the analysis of reasoning going deeper. And in today's discussion, we're focused on point of view. Now, as a reminder, this series is, as we say, going deeper into the elements of reasoning or the analysis of thought. So we presuppose that you have some understanding of the elements of reasoning at this point. But if you do not, let me remind you or introduce you to this idea that the elements of our reasoning can be broken down into 8 elements. We have a purpose whenever we reason. We ask a question or multiple questions. We use information. We make inferences based on the information and the assumptions that we're making, another element. We think within concepts, which of course are connected with our assumptions. And all of this is couched within a point of view, which is our focus for this discussion. And all of this reasoning leads to implications. So we're entering today at point of view. So Gerald, would you like to introduce point of view?
Yeah, let me. Point of view, as you just described, is one of the 8 elements. And one way of saying that is that whenever we reason about anything, we're always doing so from some point of view. And we can always do so from more than one point of view as well. But we're always reasoning from some point of view, meaning or having as an implication that there's no such thing as point of viewless reasoning, right? I mean, it's always from some point of view. And I could say that to me, point of view is particularly ambiguous. In all English words have a substantial amount of ambiguity to them, all natural English words, but point of view maybe has most, in that we can use the term point of view for an assumption. Someone's arguing from a conservative or a liberal point of view, assuming that liberalism or conservatism is a better approach. We can also say a point of view, often we use it synonymously with your conclusion. And I say, okay, so you're arguing that the death penalty should be abolished. So your point of view is that the death penalty should be abolished. So notice, point of view can be used in place of conclusion or assumption and several others. But as we use it in the elements, point of view is intended to capture something that is not captured by the other 7 elements. That's what makes it kind of unique. It's a way of looking at things. It doesn't mean, so if you're speaking, you're going to be speaking from Linda Elder's point of view, and I'm going to be speaking from Gerald Nosich's point of view. But it doesn't mean that we have differing assumptions or we have different conclusions or anything like that. So our assumptions and conclusions and goals can all be the same. Still, we're looking at things from a distinctive point of view. When I have my students analyze, say, an article written by someone, point of view is the one that gives them the most trouble. Initially, assumptions give them the most trouble, but they soon get clearer on assumptions. But point of view remains difficult for many of them all the way through. And it's partly because there's no specific, concrete, absolute way to delineate which point of view you're talking about. So if you're writing an article, say, you could be reasoning something out from a legal point of view. You could also reason it out from an ethical point of view, or you could reason it out from a political point of view. So notice, all 3 of those are distinctive ways of looking at things. So if you're looking at it from an ethical point of view, many legalities are irrelevant. Similarly, if I'm looking at it from a legal point of view, many times ethical considerations are irrelevant. Like adultery is in most cases unethical, but there's nothing illegal about committing adultery. So you put that off to the side. So it could be argued from a point of view like that, legal or ethical, but it could also be a person-related point of view. I mean, if you think of it just physically, my point of view is different from yours in that I'm looking at things this way and you're looking at things this way. And that means our physical point of view is different. And similarly, the point of view of us as persons is different. You're looking at things from Linda Elder's point of view, and I'm looking at things from Gerald Nosich's point of view, and those may have characteristic differences. So notice, it's not the same as legal versus ethical versus political. There can be a person-related point of view, and there can be an emotional related point of view. There's also, for just as an example, gender related point of view. So sometimes my students, they would be writing an analysis of an article, and they'd say, this is written by a man who values education a lot. And I would often say, is it relevant that this is a man? Right. That is, you should include man in the point of view only if there's something distinctively male about the writing of it. Otherwise, you should just say this is something written from the point of view of someone who values education. So notice, gender-related point of view is sometimes distinctly relevant and sometimes it's distinctly irrelevant. And you have to make decisions about that. So notice that point of view goes in many different directions at the same time, and you can choose among them. So that's why I think it gives my students more trouble. They tend to like very concrete, absolute answers, and point of view does not really give you that.
Let me. So I don't want to jump in, but would like to respond and just explain the way that I think of point of view. And you pointed out in your point of view that this is a difficult element of reasoning to learn. And let us say, if, for example, if you are trying to become skilled at reasoning through or deconstructing the logic of an article or anything that you might read, then you're going to have to articulate the point of view. And when you do that, it's going to feel like, as you said, an assumption or some assumptions. It's going to feel like some of the other elements. And this is true for assumptions, it's true for concepts, and this gives us trouble as we're learning to distinguish between the elements of reasoning, which is important to be able to do. Or we just collapse them and just forget it. We don't need to worry about deconstructing. So point of view is there for a reason. And we want to figure out what that reason is or what those reasons are. And so I think of point of view as very complicated. And so, for example, the point of view, if we take this analogy point of view literally, then we can say it is the point from which you are viewing something. So that sounds like a logical move. I just laid out what point of view would be, but then you say, but okay, then what does that mean? So you can say then, well, if I'm writing an article in which I am pointing out some problems in schooling, then I'm going to be looking at schooling as problematic in terms of its it's achieving its goal of educating and cultivating the mind.
Mhm.
As an example. So my point of view again is I'm looking at schooling as containing certain inherent problems that have to be addressed. So there are different ways of saying that point of view, but I'm looking at something, I'm seeing it in a certain way. You
Mhm.
can also say that I'm looking at, well, no, I think that would be more of an assumption. That I was going to say, I'm looking at education
Mhm.
as well from a certain point of view. And
Mhm.
that's informing my point of view right now. I'm just focused on schooling.
Mhm.
So point of view, if we can capture that, it means you can ask yourself then strategically, what am I looking at and how am I seeing it? So
Mhm.
that's one move we can make. And notice that takes into that is connected with some of the categories you were mentioning.
Mhm.
And in other words, your point of view is informed by your perspective. Your
Mhm.
perspective is coming from, for example, whether you said, for example, you mentioned the legal dimension, you
Mhm.
mentioned the gender dimension. Any of these dimensions are perspectives from which we can look at certain whatever it is that we're looking at.
Mhm.
So we have point of view, and then we have a broader move, which is your perspective,
Mhm.
that is informing your point of view, or from which your point of view is coming, in addition to keeping in mind the other elements of reasoning, of course.
Mhm.
But just for the moment, so we have point of view couched in perspective, and that perspective, now I'm going to make that I think is a that move I can defend. The next move is a little harder, it's a little more muddy, and that is that it's possible that we could say that we have, each of us, a kind of worldview, but that's very, as I say, messy, because that can move around, and it would include all of your background logic.
Right. Yeah.
So, and therefore you're going to be getting into the other elements of reasoning. But
Mhm.
where I think, so let me wrap this piece up. So point of view coming from perspective, being couched within a broader worldview, which we could say is connected to, among other things, our character. So
Mhm.
that's a scaffolding for thinking about this. And then background logic, as you know, would include all of the thoughts lurking in your mind anywhere that could be affecting the way that you're thinking at this moment about this given reality or set of realities.
So let me ask you, just because many of the people who are listening to this and viewing it are not familiar with the foundations for critical thinking, for our approach to critical thinking, you talked about background logic a lot. So let me ask you to explain what you mean by that a little, because it's just not an ordinary term that people use.
Well, again, it's all of the thoughts, beliefs, unconscious or otherwise, that are operative in your mind, again, unconsciously or consciously, that could be affecting the way you're thinking right now. And I tend to think of background logic as being in the background, as in with our assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
So one way of saying it is it's all of our assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really true, because you see, take this concept, this idea. Now we need to be more concrete here. So let's say that someone, it has a sense of inferiority, and that inferiority is feeding itself.
Mm-hmm.
There is a logic to it.
Mm-hmm.
right? It has all, it entails all of the 8 elements. There is a purpose. There are questions being asked. There's information being used. Inferences are being drawn in the unconscious mind. And connected to the conscious in some ways, because some people may be aware that they are experiencing this, so it may not be entirely unconscious, but if there's an unconscious element, there's an unconscious logic there. And so it's, in other words, whenever we reason consciously, the 8 elements are present, and whenever we reason unconsciously, they're also present.
Right.
And now there could be other things going on, but there is a logic there.
Right.
And this is, again, so another way of thinking of this is we have networks of ideologies that are functioning in the back of our minds. And I, some years ago, I'll share this, I tried to capture what might be involved in, let's say, one's worldview, which is connected to this question that you're asking. So let me just read some of these. So there isn't a logic of your overarching worldview, but there are logics that you're carrying around within your mind. So, for example, the logic of one's natural language and one's skill in using it. So the better you are at understanding language and its role in human thinking, then the better you're going to be, hopefully, at controlling what you are thinking and assessing other people's thinking.
Okay.
So your command of your natural language. Then the logic of one's religious, spiritual, or metaphysical views. So, for example, how does a given person, how do you think about death? And we answer that in different ways. And mainly, I think people fear death at the unconscious level, but the conscious level is something like this. I know that that happens to everyone, but maybe it won't happen to me. And then, but some people have ways of dealing with that fear, that they deal with the fear, and people may deal with the fear in different ways. So one person may turn to a spiritual set of beliefs, and another person may, let us say, connect with the nature as God, something like that. And so how do you think about death is an example. That's in your background logic. How do you think about intimate relationships? How do you think about sexuality? How you think about sexuality is in your background logic. It's always there. Now, that doesn't mean it's always active, but it's always there. And then the logic of one's social relationships, how you think about social relationships, how you achieve a sense of well-being from those relationships. And then how do you relax, enjoy life? What are your, as it were, hobbies? What do you do to just say life is good? It's all right now. I mean, do you have tea time and do you read for a few minutes? I mean, what do you do to make sure that you are mentally well? The logic of one's view on parenting, that's there in your logic if you're a parent. The logic of how you think about your relationship to the earth itself in terms of responsibility. Whether you see yourself as part of the earth or, as it were, above the earth and having the right to do anything you want to the earth. See, all of these. So any belief system that you're carrying in your thinking, these are networks of understandings that we go back to when we are in a given situation.
Right.
So you see, it's so we don't just, if I could, it is can be confusing. But again, I'm not saying that there is a logic to our background logic. I'm saying there are multiple logics informing our worldview.
Yeah, and that's nice. And I would say that it's important to understand that when we use the word like the logic or background logics in the plural, we're not meaning logic in any kind of formal sense or that very narrow sense in which people speak about deductive or inductive logic. But what it's saying, what I hear you as saying, and what I would say is that it's not as if we're someone who just has a bunch of beliefs and attitudes and moods and that we just have a bunch of these. Rather, there is a coherence to our beliefs and attitudes and approaches and ways of problem solving. Not just one, but within any kind of system is another word used, system and network. These have a coherence. And thus, to return to point of view, our point of view, or the point of views that we carry with us around, and we look at the world through that point of view, those points of view are shaped by these various these various logics, these various coherent systems. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Gerald. Thank you for bringing me back to the question about on the logic of. So I didn't really answer that. So we have these, let's say, belief systems and networks of thoughts that we build within our minds. And when we say there is a logic to them, there are actually at least a couple of ways we can think about the logic of. One is to realize that when we say the logic of, we mean the elements of reasoning embedded in. So in other words, if I take the problem of feeling inferior, again, I showed how we have a purpose, we have a question, I didn't say what they are, but if any time that you're telling yourself something, you're giving yourself an argument, there are 8 elements are embedded in that argument. And you have therefore a set of tools in which you can enter and determine the quality of what is there, which is the whole point of this series. So the logic of means the 8 elements of reasoning embedded in when we are focused on reasoning generally. But there is another way to think about logic of, at least one other way, and that is that if you think of concepts as systems of ideas, so take the elements of reasoning, just focusing on concepts. So concepts are connected to other concepts, so you can imagine atoms connected together. And so there is a logic to that. They're interconnected. So we have these, I guess as I'm thinking about it, if you can just imagine these networks in your mind as patterns and systems laid down by you, me, all of us through a lifetime. And all of these beliefs systems could potentially become our focus, or could be informing our point of view at the moment, and we may not be aware of how that is happening. And typically we wouldn't be aware of it, because point of view is operating basically the way assumptions are operating. It's just coming from your other thinking. And
yes, just again to continue on the logic of something which is intimately connected with point of view, right? I mean, they're very closely related. If you think about the concept of the logic of, a good critical thinking move with regard to any concept is to think not of just the cases where it does apply, but of cases where it does not apply. So it's not the case that everything has a logic. I mean, there are some things that just don't have a logic or don't have much of a logic, like if you think of names of streets, often in cities, the streets in one direction will go Oak, Main, Avondale, and so forth. And there's no logic to them. There's no logic to them. In the other direction, they might go Third Avenue, Fourth Avenue, Fifth Avenue, and there is a logic to them. And one of the ways you can tell is by making a prediction about, well, what's the street that's going to follow Sixth? Well, you're not sure, but because sometimes they vary it, but there's a very strong likelihood that the next one is going to be Seventh. Whereas if one is Elm Street, and I ask you what the next street is, you have no way particularly of guessing it. So in reasoning, we're interested in things that have a logic, that are coherent. And if you think about the emphasis, switching it over to education, a lot of education is pitched toward learning, really memorizing facts. And facts often have no logic to them. If you just think of the fact in and of itself, like studying history, right? Whereas what you want with somebody studying history is for them to understand how history takes place or has taken place in this environment. And so again, you're looking for the logic of, or the logics of how the historical period develops. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, could I jump in just with that, the fact that when we think about the logic of, we're thinking about reasoning, but we, again, could make exceptions. For example, take your preferences. So although there is a logic to a given person's preference, there is not an overall logic that we could lay down upon it. So we can't say, well, what kind of shirt do you like to wear? I like to wear a striped blue shirt. So therefore, that's the right answer. And so we're going to lay that down on every person. Every person's got to wear the same color shirt. You see, that's your logic, but it's not a logic that we share. And it's important to know when you're facing those questions as well. And okay, now then back to point of view now. And by the way, I wanted to mention one other thing about background logic, which is that we have biological propensities and we have ideological, social, and historical influences. Actually, you could probably just make this simple division: biological and ideological. You have the biological, and then you have the fact that we are highly linguistic. And if you understand what language does to the human animal, then you will know everything, as it were. In other words, the language is so powerful as a guide in all of our thinking, all of our background logic, and the way we think about the biological side, that you see, you can collapse social and historical into ideological. If you understand ideological to mean generally ideas. Oh, I see. Yeah, right. Not political narrow belief systems. Right. Yeah. So we have the biological propensities that often, again, are lying within the background logic. And we're not necessarily aware of those. And this is not new. I mean, this is what Freud was talking about. Yeah. And even at the basic physical level of biology. I mean, since I was 5 years old, I've been deaf in one ear. And that influences my point of view or shapes my point of view a great deal. Anything having to do with sound, I'm attuned to it in a different way from the way two-eared people are. Like, I can't tell what direction sounds are coming from. And I have to be able to see the person's mouth move if I really want to be able to hear what they're saying and so forth. So notice something just as basic as that, as being deaf in one ear, influences how you view things. In this case, how I hear things, where view is used now synonymously with hearing, not just visual. Yeah, so. Right, and we have to each of us has to deal with as it were, the body,
Mhm.
the biological side.
Right.
And that can really, I mean, we, again, though, to deal with the biological side, we use ideas
Mhm. Mhm.
mainly. And so these are intertwined.
Well, to think about the biological side, we use ideas. I mean, the biology kind of carries on, unfortunately, sometimes on its own.
To think to as it were, I'm trying not to use the word get command of it, but to be doing reasonable things, the reasonable biological things that you should be doing.
Yeah, right.
So, for example, exercising, eating the right foods.
Mhm.
We already talked about the sexual dimension. In other words, you have to you can't ignore any of that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's affecting, again, your worldview, your perspective,
Mhm.
your point of view.
Mhm.
Now, let's turn to some examples. And what we all want, I think, is to know how critical thinking helps us. How does it help me?
Mhm.
How does this discussion between Linda and Gerald help me if
Mhm.
I'm listening? And what we want is to understand point of view in a rich way so that it helps us think better in a given situation.
Right.
So, for example, if and your emotional side can really help here. If you are emotional about something and you're about to have a discussion with someone,
Mhm.
then let's say that your child has been accused of something at school and now you've been called to talk to the principal and you're the parent, and you're thinking, how dare this person, these people, the way they're treating my child, my perfect angel of a child. And you have this perspective, is in the way that I'm articulating this, that
Mhm.
my child can do no wrong.
Mhm.
And the point of view from which I'm looking this is that I'm looking at these people, these teachers and these administrators, as, in essence, oppressors of my son.
Mhm.
So if let's say that's happening in my mind, that's me, and I'm thinking this way, then
Mhm.
I should be able to say, wait a minute, you're feeling a lot of angst here and a lot of emotion. So you might be making some mistakes here. So why don't you back this up a bit and ask yourself, what is your point of view right now?
Mhm.
And then you can say, and then you can also make other moves. You can say, what concepts am I using, what assumptions, but you can say, how am I looking at this and how am I seeing it? And then in connection with that, it's important for people to understand that whatever your perspective is, whatever your point of view is, as you go into any given situation, the idea is that you believe you are right in that moment as a human, generally speaking. And so, for example, take the way people who are political on the right or on the left, and they'll often use the same terms, and here's what they're doing. They're focused on the same information, but they're seeing the information completely differently,
Right.
based on their perspective.
Right.
And they use these terms like how important it is for us you people, to use good reasoning and to use critical thinking.
Mhm.
So my point is that not only are we each seeing the information from our point of view, that we're also seeing our point of view as the righteous position.
Mhm.
And we are the ones that are thinking critically. We are the ones who are doing the best reasoning. So the people on the right are saying this, and the people on the left are saying this.
Mhm.
And so you see, we see the problem.
Mhm.
So your point of view and your perspective are guiding the way you're seeing this information.
Right.
And which information you are focused on, which information you're accepting, which information you're rejecting.
Mhm.
And so we can think of many examples of that. I just gave one. Go
Right.
ahead. Did you want to?
Yeah, in connection with that, I would say that a really good, straightforward, critical thinking move to make, I say straightforward, though I don't mean that it's easy, is to think of point of view when you're dealing with an issue, to think of point of view as in the plural. What are the points of view that are relevant to this situation? So in the case you gave of the parent who thinks that her child or his child can do no wrong, it would be a good idea to try to look at it sincerely and honestly from the point of view of the teachers or of the school systems, right? And that is not to parody their point of view, not to diminish it, but to say, okay, suppose I were an educator and I were confronting this kind of situation. How might I be looking at it? Or how might these people actually be looking at it? And so I have to put myself with intellectual empathy in the point of view of the other person. Doesn't automatically solve the problem, but it tends to give me insight. And I also want to distinguish putting myself within someone else's point of view, even a horrible point of view, might be important, but to put myself in the other person's point of view does not mean I accept the other person's point of view. It means that I see it and I can reason my way through it. So a way I often think about it is to say, suppose this person is reasoning it out. How are they reasoning it out? And I kind of do that without judgment. And then after I'm done analyzing it, now I can read my judgment and say, here's what I think is correct about it. Here's what I think is incorrect, inaccurate about it, and so forth.
Yes, exactly.
Plural,
yeah. Thank you for expanding that.
Yeah.
So the idea is that, but what I was focusing on recognizing that I'm, as it were, locked into a point of view. And I think that if you can do that, if you can do that and you can say, look at what you're saying right now. You're saying that your side's right. I mean, that's primitive thinking. And you've got to realize that you haven't even heard the other argument.
Right.
So to do that takes multiple processes.
Right. Yeah.
And we are focusing on different parts of those processes.
Yeah. And you use the example of conservative and liberal. And it seems I would use as a kind of a basic critical thinking criterion this: if you're a critical thinking conservative or a critical thinking liberal, but I'll just do the conservative side. If you're a critical thinking conservative, you should be able to articulate how a liberal thinks of the matter and do so and analyze it without judgment at first. You can bring the judgment in afterwards, as I mentioned earlier. And so that serves as a kind of test, in my mind at least, of whether you're engaged in critical thinking about the issue. If you're able to describe neutrally how the person on the other side thinks of it. And that's often a great challenge. It's a difficult challenge to take myself out of my perspective, especially as you mentioned, an emotion-laden perspective, and see things empathetically, with intellectual empathy from the other person's perspective. Right. Because otherwise we tend to demonize those other people and say they're just completely irrational or evil or something like that. And they might be being irrational or evil. I'm not saying they're not, but they're not simply irrational or simply evil. There's a logic to how they're thinking about things.
Right. And you brought in their intellectual empathy. And this is connected to what I mentioned earlier, that if we want to say that use the term, let's say, worldview, in a way that may be helpful, is to say that your worldview, again, is connected to your character.
Mhm.
Because these are traits within yourself that are
Mhm.
established.
Mhm.
Then, of course, you can change those.
Mhm.
That's the idea with critical thinking. We can mold that. We can become more intellectually empathetic. We can have a higher level of intellectual integrity.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we now, so then the intellectual empathy, you see, if I, a person is, if I am aspiring to intellectual empathy, let us say I have decided that I'm going to become a critical thinker. And
Mhm.
that means I'm going to have to embrace intellectual virtues
Mhm.
like intellectual empathy, intellectual autonomy, again, intellectual integrity, perseverance, confidence in reason. These are some of them. If I'm going to be doing that, just again focusing on intellectual empathy, let's just say I take that one and I start with that one, and I say to myself, all right, that means I can enter other viewpoints, whether I agree with them or not, and I can articulate those viewpoints
Mhm.
well to a given person's satisfaction
Right.
if that person were in the room.
Right.
But now then I would say to myself, well, how would you, let's say, practice that? And one way to practice that is to say to you, let's say you read something that seems a bit controversial to you, so really accept the argument. Maybe right then you say to yourself, okay, close the book, state the argument.
Mhm.
Now you must, Linda, accurately articulate this argument
Mhm.
as if the person who wrote it were standing over you, and all you're doing is trying to get an A+ for accuracy.
Right. 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 Accuracy in the sense of fidelity to that what that person is
Exactly,
arguing. Yeah.
exactly that.
Yeah.
And then, and only then, when I've done that in good faith, then I consider the argument in good faith. And then
Right.
I ask myself, is there any truth in it?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that in because when I said you have to, I'll use conservative and liberal as the placeholders in this. I said a conservative. I'll switch it to a liberal. A liberal has to be able to articulate the conservative's point of view, be able to do that. And what you added is that other dimension that seems to me essential, and that is, how do you tell whether you've done that or not? How do you tell whether if I'm a liberal? How am I able to? How can I tell whether I've articulated a conservative's point of view as well accurately with fidelity? And the answer, I think, is just what you said, and that is, what I have to do is I have to articulate it in such a way that the conservative, person on the other side, is going to say, yes, that's exactly what I believe. They can't say, no, that's not it. No, you're distorting it. They can't weasel around. They have to say, yes, exactly. And when you do that with someone, what often happens anyhow, is that the person will say, so you agree with me?
This is what I mean. They would be saying, so you're invited in. If you
Yeah.
did it accurately,
Right.
spot on, so to speak.
Yeah, and the one-sidedness of our point of view, I brought in intellectual empathy, and I periodically have a favorite one of the intellectual character traits. Intellectual empathy is one, but my favorite changes from time to time. But I think my most abiding favorite is intellectual humility. And a great thing to realize always when I've got a distinctive point of view, which is different from other people's, is how much I don't know about the background of their point of view. How I don't know about their life, what brought them to that, the kinds of issues they're facing, the kinds of considerations they're bringing in, the kinds of assumptions. In fact, I will, unless I know the person extremely well, I'd say 90% of what is going on in their point of view is something I'm going to be ignorant of. I'm not going to know about. And that would give me a kind of tentativeness to my own point of view. I don't want to say tentativeness. It would make me step back from my point of view for a while and say, well, there's a lot here that I don't know. And so I need to face up to that reality. I think, yeah.
So the human tends to think, or people tend to think that they know a lot about other people. You've been married to someone for many years, and now you think you know everything about them.
Yeah.
Now you know everything they're thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
When really, you know almost nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And though you may know the person well,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what they're thinking.
Right.
But the tendency is to say, we're on the same page. It's like with students, the tendency of teachers is to think that students are basically getting what they're saying when they're lecturing.
Right. Yeah.
I'm saying they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
And so the point of view, what we want to do again is to be able to locate our point of view, to know when we are being irrational in our point of view, to know that our perspective is informing our point of view, and that we don't know the other person's point of view maybe ever fully.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, even on a given topic.
Mm-hmm.
And then here are some other ways of just thinking about the ways in which we can look at the world. And I'm reading from Critical Thinking Tools for Taking Charge of Your Professional and Personal Life. So we can look at the world from a point in time,
Mm-hmm.
16th, 17th, 18th, 21st century. You can imagine yourself born in the Dark Ages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can imagine yourself being caught within any set of circumstances in a given time.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who studies history feels that if you study it well, you feel the weight of what it might have felt like to live in that era.
Mm-hmm.
And then a culture. So we were born at a point of time, each of us, and we're trapped in that point in time. People like to do my time travel type imaginary experiences. That's all well and good, but the fact is you're trapped in this point in time.
Right.
And then you are also born within a culture, a broader culture. So Western, Eastern, South American, Japanese, French, Turkish, and so forth. A religion, you're born within a set of religious ideologies or not. A gender, and there are multiple genders. Sexual orientation, a profession. So now the profession is something that you presumably choose. Well, many people presumably choose their professions, but just think that our professions come out of our cultures, the systems set up by the cultures, which are determined by the belief systems. So when we are going through, getting ready to go to college, and we're thinking, what do we want to do when we grow up? Then we think, oh, I'll be this. And then we think, I'm choosing for myself. And you don't realize, no, you're choosing within the iron cage of humanity's.
Right. It's not like you're going to choose, I'm going to be a big game hunter, or I'm going to be a hut builder is going to be my profession. I mean, it's just not part of the culture anymore. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but all of us think that we have a freedom in that we will put it another way. The world could be very different what it is. And there could be very many more and better choices for humans, the types of jobs that we could have. Let's just take sustainability of the Earth's resources. How many jobs could go into doing that? And that's a worthy profession. So anyway, we're just, again, trapped within these belief systems. And then we can think within a discipline.
Mhm.
And many people, when they are, and many professionals do end up developing, of course, their skills within a discipline.
Mhm.
So biology, chemistry, geology, astronomy, anthropology, literature, art, music, dance, you name it, any discipline
Mhm.
we can think within. Now, people often think within those points of view quite well. In other words, you can think well within your discipline, but not think well anywhere else. So in any case, but from that point of view, you are a good thinker.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And that some of these, at least for me, have a downside to them. For instance, I know a good deal of history, and so I read a lot. I think about it, and so forth. And so what it does is it gets in the way of my enjoyment of movies often a lot. If they're about the past and they're really superimposing 20th or 21st century ideas into the past, I would like to be able to just overlook it and just say, oh, let me just enjoy it on its own right. But many of the times I can't. I mean, in Braveheart, the 13th century Scots hero, William Wallace, is being killed at the end, tortured and killed at the end, and he yells out, "Freedom!" And I'm thinking, oh, this is a distinctly American idea. This is not. I mean, other countries believe in freedom, but it doesn't have this kind of immense quality that you're going to shout it out when you're dying, where the way you might shout out mother or father or something like that, or so it just gets in the way of my enjoyment of a lot of things. And it's true not just for history, but for sociology or psychology, where I get these. I mean, if it's something I know well, anything about quantum mechanics, for instance, how it affects your life. I think, oh my God, you can't realize how. I mean, quanta are really tiny. Are not going to affect your life. Anyhow, yeah. So I can look at these. Yeah, the point of view.
Yeah, so just to name a few others. So we also can think about the world from a social group, a professional group, in other words, not just the profession, but a group you belong to within the profession. And we can think of the world from an emotional state. We can think of the world from an age group point of view, and we're very ageist in our culture. And then most people, as they're aging in our culture, is really when they're pretty young, they start talking about how old they are. And that's something that's and people are stereotyped in our culture based on age. So every culture is going to have its own. We'll overlap in many ways as humans, but we'll have our own variations of these. And then a company philosophy. And so then you can look at this from another perspective. You can take a list of some objects of your thinking. Just name a few. I'll just say life. We're not going to do it. You can say, I look at life and I see it in the following ways. Men, women, human conflict, politics. So all of these are actually concepts in the way that I'm explaining it. So we're looking at these, but how are we seeing them? Right. And it's like this, people, if you take something simple like Christmas, now everyone has a point of view on Christmas. They see it, they look at it, and they see it in a certain way, or a set of ways.
Everyone in certain societies. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And within various cultures, based in according to your family. And so, and according to lots of different variables.
Mhm.
So even though we can look up the word Christmas in a dictionary, that's not going to match your
Yeah.
perspective of Christmas.
Right.
And so your perspective is how you look at it, how you see it. And again, this is connected to the other points of view. I mean, sorry, the other elements of reasoning.
Mhm.
So somebody could do this activity, which we have here, take any one of these and say, this is what I'm looking at. This is how I'm seeing it. I actually did this activity. I've done this a few times with teachers. And I remember that in all of these cases, the people who have worked together for years, when they sat side by side and discussed their point of view on these different
Oh,
concepts, found themselves to be very surprised.
right. Yes.
And
Yeah.
suddenly we're talking about welfare recipients, drug use, human values, abortion, the police, conservatives, radicals. You see, and suddenly you're sitting next to someone whose ideas, as it were, your ego can't stand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did have someone mention they were surprised at how different their views were, but and also how they had to become sort of comfortable with that in
Mhm.
the activity. So
Mhm. Yeah.
here's a person I've always respected
Mhm.
in our teaching, and now this person thinks in a very different way from me, but so I can't get up and leave the room. I can't walk off and say, I can't talk to you anymore.
Mhm.
So in this setting, we are trying to show that you can still share your views.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's a very nice example, and it's an example. It's sometimes called well, it's a difference between thinking of things from small to large. If you think of governments, we could say the government of United Kingdom has this kind of point of view on this matter. Well, the government passes laws, it makes resolutions, it makes treaties, it does all kinds of things. But if you think of government closely, you realize that there's a sense in which there's not really any such thing as a government. What there are is a bunch of individual people. And so when they pass a law, I mean, all these individual people may have entirely different rationales for passing that law. They may disagree about all kinds of things. With a law, it's relatively easy because they vote, you tabulate the vote, but there's a lot of things that are not voted on at all. And you wonder, or I wonder, how it is that we can say that this large entity, a government, a country, has a point of view or draws a certain conclusion when it's constructed from people who have wildly different points of view. So your example of sitting in a group with people you worked on the same kind of issues for 20 years and finding out that we're all different, it seems to me that that's going to be true of any assemblage of people. There's just too much in us that goes in different directions.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where our background logic comes into play, and the various views that we hold. And it's true. Again, it's a way we conceptualize, in this case, government. And then much could be said about the point of view of the various politicians. And so you could say, well, if I were going to examine each of these politicians that are running for this office, and I'm going to articulate this person's point of view, how would I articulate it? The person is seeing what, and how are they seeing it? For example, many politicians are still mainly focused on economic issues. And they're placing economics over environment, which isn't needed. If we think critically, it's not needed. We can have both,
Mm-hmm.
but they're holding on to the old way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's their point of view. That's the perspective within which they are trapped.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so these people are holding back our progress on the health of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but unfortunately, many people are manipulated by these politicians, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not thinking critically about the facts.
Mm-hmm.
They're being easily persuaded. So again, it comes back to let's just say it this way, what is the point of view of the critical thinker? Now, let me, if I could, read from the analytic reasoning guide. There's a page towards the back focused on point of view. And here are some things that skilled reasoners do with respect to point of view. They keep in mind that people have different points of view, especially on controversial issues. We've already covered that.
Mm-hmm.
They do not credit, staying with the skilled reasoners, consistently articulate other points of view
Mm-hmm.
and reason from within those points of view to adequately understand them. So
Mm-hmm.
notice, consistently articulate other points of view.
Mm-hmm.
So how often is anyone saying, Gerald, let me articulate this from your point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
How many people argue with their spouses, and before long they don't even know what they're arguing about anymore? They're just trying to hurt each other. So then you can stop and say, how about if you argue from my point of view and I'll argue from your point of view?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Then when you make that move, then you'll see that somebody's not being reasonable here.
Yeah. And I can, just as another example, I every once in a while run into a medical doctor, who will tell me what he's prescribing and why and what I should do and a whole bunch of things. And every once in a while, one of them will say, so could you tell me back what you've heard me saying? And I've always been impressed when they say it, because most of the time they just tell you. And then there's the assumption that most of us teachers carry with us as well, that if I tell you, you got it. You got it fully. As far as I can tell, that's very seldom true.
True. And well, an easy way to prove this
Mm-hmm.
is to do this. Read a paragraph,
Mm-hmm.
any paragraph
Mm-hmm.
that you haven't read before, and close the book or close the article and say in your own words what you just read.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And hopefully any person who does this will readily see that you remember almost nothing
Right.
from what you read. In other words, in terms of your ability to articulate it clearly and accurately, you may have some gestalt effect. And this is what often students will do. They'll come in and they'll say, I just couldn't stand this author. Just couldn't stand him. Just hated everything he said. So then you say, well, what was it that you thought he said?
The whole thing. Yeah.
And yes, and then there's no response.
Right.
They have nothing. So in other words, you have no idea what he said, but you can say that he's all of these negative things.
Mm-hmm.
So that means an F.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding is the first step to critique.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding is not for critique, it is for understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, I don't want to say, well, I'm going to just understand you in order to knock you down.
Right.
Well, I'm first going to try to understand you. I'm not going to be saying I'm going to critique it because I have no idea what you're saying. Maybe I've been wrong all of these years on something, and you are now going to enlighten me, at which time I will be saying thank you, and I will be appreciative if I'm thinking critically.
Mm.
right? So, but usually the mind, or often the mind doesn't work that way. So now you're telling me something I need to hear and I don't really want to hear it. And I'm actually trying not to hear it and
Well,
not to credit it.
well, the way you said it, I'm thinking that the words you actually use are slightly, somewhat overstated, because, and I've come to various conclusions in my life, and if you're arguing a different conclusion from mine, I'm not likely to be as open-minded as you just said. I mean, if you, or if someone's going to argue that the Earth is really flat, it's not as if I'm going to say, okay, I may have been wrong about the Earth being a sphere all these years. Let me hear what you have to say. There's a sense in which first, I just don't have time. And second of all, if it's a conclusion I've come to with on very solid grounds for a long period of time, then I'm not going to be particularly open-minded about taking seriously what the other person says.
Well, yeah, so let me give it the correction is this: you're not obligated to enter every point of view.
Right.
You're obligated to enter those that are reasonable.
Yeah.
But you may not see it as reasonable.
It's true. Yeah.
If you're not willing to hear it. And you see, the Earth is flat. Example is illuminating that there are some things that we can set in stone, as it were, because they've been proven. Now, if somebody comes along and tries to unprove that the Earth is rotating around the sun, then, as you say, there is a place down the road, and I'm not. Anyway, you see, that makes no sense. You're not going to accept things that make no sense.
Right.
But now, here's where the difficulty comes in. Let's say you're not facing that kind of, let me say there's another kind of case where it's locked in stone. And this is where you have your ethical principles. And so those you're not going to waver from. You are going to bank on those. So, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, such like principles. And so it's not as if there is nothing that we can have as foundations in our thinking, but it's where we go wrong, I think, is where we have held beliefs uncritically. And in other words, we've never examined them ourselves. Now, somebody is trying to convince me, in this case, to open my mind. The egocentric side is going to want to say, of course you're right, Linda. You're always right. And that's an example. It's not always how the egocentric thinking works, but that's an example of it. So, and so therefore, in that case, I may be saying to myself, well, this could be a reasonable argument here. Maybe you should listen. The other side of me, that's the reasonable side. The other side is saying, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so. And this is happening at the unconscious level. So that, when you said I was exaggerating, that was a voice. I was giving the voice that is happening at the unconscious level. And so this argument between, let's say, the egocentric side and the rational side is happening very quickly in the mind. I'm not going to listen to this guy. He's off his rocker. Okay, so wait a minute. What do you have to say? And Linda, maybe it's you. Okay, so just listen. You haven't. This is not an area that you are experienced in, or that you have all this expertise in. You just think you do, or you see what I mean. So it takes someone who reads a little bit of history, but they don't really have very good command of it. So now they're talking to an actual historian. And the historian saying, well, no, you don't really understand this. And the other person saying, well, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because I've been reading this and I've been reading that. But so you have a little bit of knowledge in that case. But and so this is connected to the saying, a little bit of learning can be dangerous.
Yeah. And let me say, I said about the Earth being flat, and you said that can be proved. But I think of it as a kind of continuum, with the Earth being flat on one side and as having very, very strong evidence in favor of the Earth being spherical. But then there's a continuum between it and our belief. So I would say more reasonably, I'm not going to take seriously points of view where a great preponderance of evidence that I've reflected upon goes on the other side, right? So that it's going to mean it's not going to be an all or nothing matter as if it can just be proven. And that's, I think, don't see what you say about this. That's also true of the ethical principles, because I'm thinking that when you say that our ethical principles are set in stone, you're thinking of ethical principles that you have reflected on, tested out, worked your way through, and so forth. But if my ethical principle is, say, it's okay to shoot the enemy in times of war, and that applies to anybody on the other side, they're all combatants in one way or another. So my ethical principle is I'm entitled to defend my country even by shooting these people who are unarmed, say. Well, that's an ethical principle which have oftentimes people have changed, right? Even though it's solidly rooted in them, they've seen the effects of it. So if I've reflected on my ethical principles a great deal, then maybe that's going to be set in stone. If they're just part of a culture I grew up with, then my ethical principles also can change and sometimes should change. Even as an adult, many of my ethical principles have changed. Maybe not the most basic ones, like the do unto others one. Yes, yeah.
Well, and there are many other principles that we use in critical thinking just say critical thinking principles. So I'm going to ask myself, is this logical? Does this seem to make sense? It could still be accurate, even though it doesn't seem logical.
Right.
And so it's I think if we go into any situation with the idea that we could have something to learn here, and we don't know it all, even if we think we do, or even if we've thought about it a lot. So everything that we're talking about now is predicated upon the context. So we're trying out different contexts as I see it, and we're trying to figure out how this holding your beliefs tentatively in your point of view in a way that could be changed. We're trying to figure out, well, where does it make sense to do that? And where maybe does it not make sense to do that? And so in order to really burrow into that, I think we have to just go to circumstances. So in this kind of situation, what is likely to be happening? Okay, so let me give you an example. So when in our work, Gerald, you and I, when we teach people critical thinking in any settings, in workshops, conference events, courses, in any settings, we are critiqued. And often we receive the critique. In other words, people are critiquing us in their minds as presenters of this content. And they're sometimes giving us their critique because we're asking for it, or they're just giving it to us. And I'll speak for myself. Some of these times I have been told something about myself as a presenter, and I have not wanted to hear that. And I have been sure that couldn't actually be true of me, but now maybe, just maybe, there's something in it. And since I don't want to have to hang up my critical thinking badge, as Richard and I used to often say to one another, if we couldn't actually rise to the critical thinking task, we have to hang up our critical thinking badge. Since I didn't ever want to have to do that, then I would have to tell myself, Linda, you're being a little, you're complaining in your mind a little too much here. That little bitty complaining is telling you something. Maybe there's nothing in this, what this person's saying. But just the fact that you are avoiding it and getting all defensive, this tells you that you need to listen.
Right.
And it may be in those cases, there
Mhm.
may be just a small truth in it.
Right.
It may be that on the whole, yes, you were okay, you were on solid ground, but there's just one little piece that you didn't really want to hear. So then that's a case, that's a more mundane everyday case where you can be making small mistakes in thinking. Basically, you're open to feedback, let's just say. Obviously, if it's anything major you want to know, let's hope. But you see, these are the challenges I think that we face.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I remember this is a case of reading, but I move my hands a lot when I talk. And in advocacies for public speaking, people advise don't move your hands a lot. Stand very, very still. And I do it even on Zoom when my hands are really out here. and I'm gesturing and people can't see it. And there's that picture that we sometimes show on our website of me and Daniel Ellsberg, where I'm going like this, and Daniel Ellsberg is going backwards. And so I don't know if somebody ever pointed that out to me, but I read about it and I found it just as you said. I feel defensive about it. I move my hands a lot, and I haven't quite reconciled myself to it. But I also thought I don't want to spend the time. I want to think about the content and not about how I'm presenting the content, even if my hand gestures are sometimes for some people distracting. And I'm not sure the research on this is definitive or very strong, but I don't want to give it prominence in my mind, because then when I'm saying something about critical thinking, look at it, my hands are moving right at this moment as I'm saying it to you. If I'm saying something about critical thinking, I want my focus to be on the critical thinking, not on the way my body is moving at the time.
So this shows that this is contextual. So you're taking a given case and you're saying, and that, so just speaking from your point of view, if I could for a moment, so you're saying you may read some kind of feedback about that, and that might irritate you a little bit, but you say to yourself, well, it doesn't irritate me enough to say, because the content is what we are focused on. And I think that relates to a lot of some of our issues. In other words, because just again, speaking for myself, I'm so focused when I'm teaching on the content, I will sometimes miss things like poor lighting or something is in the background I didn't notice, or I put people in a breakout room and I think I'm sharing to all the rooms, but I'm not. And instead I'm sharing to myself, so there are all these little things, and you have to ask yourself, what do you most value? And then that's part of your point of view. And then there are other cases where, for example, somebody says, I felt that you were not listening to me when I was giving you my concern. And when people say something like that to me, that tells me I need to listen. And maybe the person is overly sensitive. Maybe the person is coming from their background logic that isn't seeing my behavior in the way that I hoped they would. But I need to hear that whatever I was trying to send was not being received in the way I was trying to send it. And so as thinkers, we're much better off with with some degree of intellectual humility, where we can say, well, so Linda, you can't just keep giving yourself excuses like, yeah, so-and-so may be sensitive and you have all these reasons why if it's said multiple times, then you need to pay attention to that and you need to take it into account. So that's a different kind of example from, the technological side, or even, the personal side, the way you wear your hair, what kind of clothes you wear. And people sometimes complain about things like that. So we're always having to decide in a given situation how to make most sense of this.
And the example I gave, it was really about moving hands. It was what they say might be accurate, that moving hands is distracting to some people a certain amount of the time, but so it's accurate. Let's say it's accurate. That's one of the standards, but to my way of thinking, it doesn't have, I brought in significance and relevance in that it's not important enough to me to
Exactly.
change it. And that's an important consideration. And another one that relates to yours is I also want to guard myself against the perfectionism. I mean, that takes part of that imposes a point of view that I should not make mistakes, that I should, and that's even if somebody says I haven't listened to them. I like you say, tell myself, wow, I've got to listen better, because listening is something that matters to me a whole lot in any individual case. But if I step back, I'm going to realize that if there are 50 people in a room, many people, and I don't mean just with me, many people are going to feel as if they have not been heard, that they have not been listened to. And that's part of the dynamics of human interaction. And I can correct for that only so much. But if someone brings it to my attention, I definitely want to. I like that very much when I hear that. But I've got to weigh one thing against another and not hold myself to unreasonable standards of always being able to hear what the other person says.
Well, and in the end, again, to bring in another intellectual virtue, we have to have confidence in reason, meaning that we need to just follow the facts where they lead us. And we need to think as well as we can about those. And when we do that, we have a more developed point of view. And I'll take a very controversial subject, not to explore it, but just to introduce it here. And that is the issue of abortion. So if you do not believe in the right to choose, for a woman to choose, then what are the implications of that? In other words, there are many people who are going to choose. For example, there are many people who are going to get abortions one way or another, if they have to do it in themselves. And that's a fact. And so therefore, if I'm trying to figure out what makes most sense here, I've got to consider that fact and the implications of that fact, important implications of that. And then I've got to realize that there are going to be more children born who are unwanted. That's going to be another fact. And I've got to now look at the social service system that we currently have, and I have to ask myself whether this system can accommodate these unwanted children. And I know that they can't, because it's not accommodating the ones that are here now that they are trying to help. See, it's complicated. But if I'm going to think critically about this, I've got to consider all of these facts.
Right.
And then you can say, well, that still doesn't take away the fact that you take away a child's life.
Right.
And at some point you have to say, that's true, it's a fetus. And we're only, in other words, you would have to do this within reason, allow abortion within reason, if you allow it. And it's true, all of the things, the fact that, you are ending a potential life. But you can then go further and say every time a sperm is dismissed, then it is a life that died, or an egg is a life that potentially died. See, where does it begin and where does it end? This thing called life. So I'm not answering the question. I'm saying you would have to think about all of these and many other considerations in good faith, and say, well, let's see, then what does make sense? And then you have to also say, well, if it's a person, the woman, the mother is, if the mother can't choose what happens to her own body, that's another variable. it's like saying you can't decide what happens to your body.
Mhm,
That's
mhm.
something that we have to think through. You see, we can't just dismiss that and say, well, all of this is just one thing and one thing only. It's the life of the child. And then we back that up with religious ideology, and then that's all we have to consider. No, that's not all you have to consider. You have to consider all of this other and more relevant information. And if you've done that in good faith,
Mhm,
then you come down on the side, any side,
mhm,
then we have to accept
mhm.
your reasoning if you have done this in good faith.
Yeah, and let me just comment, because it was actually a very nice demonstration. I mean, you started off not arguing, but articulating one side, and then you went to the other side, just as we were describing before. And it was interesting because when you said the side of of why a woman should not have the right to choose, you said, but we have to come to terms with the fact that this is taking the life of a child, or taking the life of an innocent child, taking the life of a child. And I like very much that. And then you said a little bit later, you said taking the life of a fetus, making that distinction. But it was nice that you used the child one first, because that is the argument of the people who are against legalized abortion. That is, this is taking the life of a child, and they wouldn't say this is taking the life of a fetus. That kind of puts it on one side. So I like very much that you are articulating the side. You were articulating both sides, as we said, and you did it, of course, quite naturally and straightforwardly. Yeah. Yeah, so.
And I think we do have to come to terms with the idea that abortion is not a good thing. That it's, people, when we talk about the right to choose, it doesn't mean that it's something we should be doing unless we are taking it seriously. See, so it shouldn't be a form of just natural birth control. Whenever you see, you've got to, we have to take the fetus seriously as well. We've got to take all of these parts of the argument, everything that is relevant, we have to consider.
You're right.
And then we eventually have to make a decision. And that decision has to take into account all of the relevant information again.
Yeah.
And it has to weigh the information. So obviously I jumped in with a very complex.
Yeah. And there's a distinction that we mentioned earlier, and and I'll just apply it to abortion, though I'm not going to be on one side or the other. And that is, there's a difference between the legal dimension and the ethical dimension. So even if I were to believe that abortion was wrong, morally wrong, that doesn't automatically decide whether it should be legal or not. There are plenty of things that are morally wrong that are completely legal, like adultery or lying to your spouse over and over again, but it's perfectly legal to do that, even though it's wrong. So the fact of being right or wrong doesn't decide the question of legality or illegality.
Yes, very, very good distinction.
Yeah.
And when there are a lot of humans living on the planet. We're making decisions in blocks of people. We call countries and etc. And we have to make the best decisions we can, given all of the people and all of the realities that they face. And we have to remember that, for example, just speaking from my point of view, I have to remember that I'm not humans. I am a human. I'm one human with beliefs. And I am not everyone else. And there may be people who think in ways, I know that there are, many people who think in ways I've never imagined being able to think within. I mean, take any expert within a field, they can make all kinds of moves that other people can never make. And so we have to situate ourselves within our ignorance. And we want to be, like in the case of abortion, we have to say it's a hard issue. And it's,
yeah. And I would say I would be very pleased if people on both sides were kept to their point of view, but also said, but it's a hard issue. I would like them to take that seriously on either side.
This is why I think we keep going. I keep sort of sticking with this, because you have, when I see people making political arguments, they end up name calling fairly quickly.
Mhm.
And they're using grand generalizations,
Mhm.
and they're demonizing each other.
Mhm.
Instead of saying, look, let me first grant your side of the argument,
Mhm.
and you tell me if I've got it. And if I'm off, you correct me.
Mhm.
And then I want you to do the same for me.
Yeah.
And then I want us to see if we can be moved anywhere.
Mhm.
And in the end, we have to have some set of rules, regulations, and we want to keep them to a minimum, but we do have to have them, because people apparently cannot just do what is best on their own. And in any case, we need that for things like, traffic. I mean, if anybody could drive any way they want to, everybody would be getting into wrecks all the time. So, we have to have some guidelines. And this is why we can't just sweep this kind of issue under the rug.
Yeah.
And say, we just can't talk about it to each other, because we just, we can't talk side to side. Well, then that means that we can't think critically.
Mhm. Mhm.
And when you say that you're not willing to hear another point of view, you are saying that is reasonable to consider. Then you're saying, I'm not willing to think critically right now.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So very quickly, to finish, what skilled reasoners do when they are focused on point of view, or with respect to point of view, so they seek other viewpoints, especially when the issue is one they believe in passionately. That was relevant to our recent example. They confine their monological reasoning to problems that are clearly monological. And monological problems are ones for which there are definite correct and incorrect answers, or definite procedures for finding the answers. In multi-logical problems, there are competing schools of thought that we would have to consider as reasoners. So, in other words, when people are thinking in a narrow way, they confine that thinking to that narrow area, and they understand that they're thinking well within that monological point of view, but that doesn't mean that they're thinking well anywhere else, something like that.
Right.
And as against unskilled reasoners who confuse multi-logical and monological issues. So here, a person may think, well, there's a right answer, whenever it's actually multi-logical. And then skilled reasoners recognize when they are most likely to be prejudiced. We've already touched upon that, but we're still coming back to that, because that's in our background logic, this idea that we already have the way, the truth, and the light, and so we do prejudge situations. And this is very much affecting our point of view and our perspective. And then finally, approach problems and issues with a richness of vision and an appropriately broad worldview, as against reasoning within inappropriately narrow or superficial perspectives.
Let me say something. It might be related, but it takes off on the monological issue and reasoning within a certain perspective. So sometimes people will say to me, or teachers will sometimes say to me, that point of view does not enter the natural sciences very strongly, or maybe they'll sometimes say not at all, meaning if you're in physics, you're looking at things, of course, in terms of physics, in terms of that point of view, but various people's points of view don't much matter, maybe don't matter at all. You're actually looking at the data. And so, and there's a sense in which that seems to me to be true, but as soon as you apply a part of a natural science to the world, multiple points of view enter automatically. So if you take biology, biologically, you're just as interesting biologically if you have severe diabetes as if you don't. Either one of those is biologically interesting. But from the point of view of medicine, now you're applying it to an actual person. I mean, they're very different cases, so different perspectives. So whenever I'm if I'm in engineering and I'm thinking about constructing a bridge, there may be only a monological way of going about constructing this kind of bridge. There's only one right way to be thinking about it, and that's one we often teach students. But in practice, if you're going to build a bridge, you have to think about multiple points of view. Who's going to be using it? What are the amount of traffic there is? What's the future going to be like? What are the political and economic considerations? So all these multiple points of view come in whenever you're applying any of these kind of pure sciences to the actual world. So I thought that was a case in which being within our point of view does amazing things for us. It helps us think within physics, but it brings in point of view once we apply it.
Yeah, so there is an example of the richness of vision that you are articulating. So let me read this again. That skilled reasoners approach problems and issues with a richness of vision and an appropriately broad worldview. Now, earlier I was talking about how we're born into belief systems and then we choose professions, for example, within those belief systems. Well, and a template or reality that's been laid over us as humans is that of capitalism, and most specifically unbridled capitalism, which is what I want to focus on here. Now, a person who has a richness of vision and an appropriately broad worldview is able to see through problems in unbridled capitalism, as an example. And they're not confined within any ideological structures. They create what makes sense to create within the realities that they live within. So they're not saying, for example, well, I'm just going to single-handedly, toss out unbridled capitalism. I mean, anybody that would be obviously very naive, or to think that you could make inroads into that. But what it can do is to help you realize that these are realities that affect your thinking and your behavior. And you can step outside of those realities and you can critique them. And when you critique them, then they have less control over you.
Yeah.
So to me, I was trying to think of an example of richness of vision. And if that's just one example, another example of richness of vision would be imagining a truly sustainable Earth. And how can that vision be realized? And many people are trying to do their part, as it were, to advance that, thankfully, because some good things are being done. But so few people lack richness of vision. So mainly people are trapped within the old systems. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm relating these characteristics of richness of vision and a broad worldview to being able to critique basically any part of society.
Yeah.
And in your example of the bridge, to be able to critique what we've done in the past, I think that was part of what you were saying. So in other words, this is a great procedure. I can see why we've always used it, but are we thinking for the future? Are we taking into account relevant information that we can see coming at us, let's say, from our future?
mhm, 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 mhm. Yeah, the thinking from multiple viewpoints, uh, I don't want to say it's the essence of critical thinking, because you can locate the essence of critical thinking in multiple areas, but it really is essential to thinking critically. I mean, even if you just think of the other, if you think of the standards of critical thinking, like accuracy or clarity, you can take any one you'd like. If I'm trying to find out if my belief about something is accurate, or if I'm saying something clearly, how do I go about finding out that it's accurate? Or how do I go about finding out that it's clear? And the way I do that most successfully is by imagining myself in in some other point of view. So sometimes if I've just got a fact, I can immerse myself in some other point of view, like Wikipedia, and I could look it up somewhere, or I can Google it. But in effect, my way of evaluating the standards of whether I'm meeting standards is not directly, but indirectly putting myself in the point of view where I can kind of look at it from the outside. I think that's part of the reflective stance that's so characteristic of much of critical thinking.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And to begin to wrap this up, unless you have other things you'd like to add, I wanted to just articulate, if we can imagine the point of view of the fair-minded critical thinker.
Mm.
So that, if we capture that, we might say that we're looking at critical thinking as the development of intellectual virtues within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's one way to articulate it. There are many others,
Yeah.
but the point of view of the critical thinker has to do with the development of intellectual character. And again, it's these virtues are reliable. So take intellectual empathy. It means I can enter a viewpoint that is not my own viewpoint.
Right.
And so I can ask myself whether I'm actually doing that, whether I'm doing that in any given situation, especially when I start to, let's say, feel defensive or feel like I'm shutting down, not listening.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening here? So if I'm aspiring to intellectual empathy,
Mm-hmm.
then I have definitive moves that I can make.
Right.
And of course, we need to bring in intellectual standards, which you have already done into that, because intellectual standards are deeply connected to intellectual virtues. So what, again, is if I'm angry at the teacher for what she's done to my child, and I'm thinking within the point of view of a critical thinker, then I can say, I'm more interested in intellectually empathizing than I am anything else. So then there's a shift. So no longer am I holding on. I'm more interested in holding on to my beliefs as I'm more interested in my intellectual character. And that means I have to be willing to listen.
Yeah. Yeah. And explore. Right. Yes.
Really hear, yes, the other side.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Gerald, is there anything you would like to add to this session?
No, I think we've addressed a lot of the main points having to do with point of view. Like all the elements, though, once you start exploring them, you can keep going deeper and deeper into them. And I find there's a richness to doing that as well. And it's one of the pleasures of talking with you about this in a podcast, and that we get to go deeper into various of the elements, in this case, point of view. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So anytime we discuss these ideas, we go deeper ourselves, explore things we didn't explore before, or exactly didn't explore in that same way. Hopefully what we all go away with is a better sense of how, we'll speak for myself, I am locked within my point of view.
Mhm.
And I want to make sure that I'm not locked, that I unlock that.
Mhm.
And we need strategies for that.
Mhm.
So when we are focused on, let's say, if I believe that it really matters that I can intellectually empathize with other people, that very much matters to me.
Right.
It very much matters to me that I have the limits of my knowledge, intellectual humility,
Mhm.
when I'm focusing on there. So in other words, what we want is to have these characteristics of mind really be valued. And when we value them, then we will see our minds opening up, and we'll be able to hear arguments we couldn't hear before. We won't have to win if that's what somebody's mind is telling them, right? I have to win, I have to win. That's one way of egocentric thinking.
Mhm.
So our egocentric thinking is happening. It is there. We each have to figure out what that is. Our sociocentric thinking is happening. We have to figure out how these pathological ways of thinking are affecting our point of view. So by that, I mean our selfishness, being our intellectual arrogance, our need, an inappropriate need to be validated.
Right.
That's to egocentric and sociocentric thinking. In other words, these are operating, they're going to be affecting our point of view. We need to know this in advance. And again, our emotions can be the red light that help us target these problems in our thinking.
Yeah. And let me say something. I mean, it occurs to me to say that there is sometimes a danger with respect to putting oneself in another person's point of view. And it brings up the difference between empathy and intellectual empathy. So there's something very, there's something very dangerous about empathizing, putting myself in the frame of mind of someone like Stalin or Hitler, right? That is feeling the feelings of that person, experiencing the distortions in their point of view, experiencing them now. That's different from intellectual empathy. That's full-blown empathy, and I can become subsumed in these often horrible thoughts. But intellectual empathy means I'm putting myself into the thinking of that person's point of view, not into the fullness of it. And that removes me almost entirely, or at least to a great degree, from the danger of immersing myself in someone else's point of view. And it seems to me that that's something important to bring out with respect to point of view. Trauma victims are, when they go into therapy, are not encouraged to go back into the trauma and re-experience it in their mind, because that's often re-traumatizing. And putting myself into Stalin's heart, emotions, full-blown thinking, it seems to me, is very likely to be traumatizing.
This is a very good point. And it's, let me build just a little bit on that with a couple of other examples. So remember, we were talking about how intellectual empathy requires us to consider any reasonable viewpoints. But there is a lot of, and we were giving, I was pointing out how sometimes you may not think it's reasonable when it is reasonable, and that's where the difficulty comes in. But that's one kind of case. And then another kind of case are the cases that you're mentioning, and we can add to that. So, for example, watching horror movies or watching a lot of crime scene movies. Now, people like those sorts of things. They like to like mysteries, and sometimes just the mystery side of it. That's a different thing. But I'm talking about where you're, so like there's this movie out now on Ed Damer, and I have no desire to see that. I don't want to know about someone who murders someone and eats their body parts. And the way of luring people to your house, I mean, all of that is very ugly. And what happens to your mind when you are thinking within that logic.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that this is the way to think about it. I'm saying this is the way that I think about it.
Mhm.
But I do think that you should protect yourself from thoughts that are not helpful.
Mhm.
And I remember being taken as a child. I think I was like a teen, to one of these horror movies. It was on exorcism.
Mhm.
And I was so traumatized by that.
Mhm.
And I swore I would never watch anything like that again. And I have not done
Wow.
since then. So I remember feeling the weight of that effect on my mind,
Mhm.
or those effects, and that fear, and
Mhm.
the just being scared.
Mhm.
Now, a lot of people can watch horror movies and they laugh. They know that it's just all a big joke.
Mhm.
And so it doesn't affect people in the same way, but still I would press people to think about, all of us, to think about how our experiences mold our minds, our
Mhm.
points of view.
Mhm.
And another one is video games. Now, I'm not saying all video games are bad. I'm saying that you should control and command everything that your mind does
Mhm.
where possible. And that includes every place you visit on the web and all the games that you engage in and all the other things that your mind does.
Mhm.
And that there are many things that you can do that will bring you down, that take you darker. So I know in some social media pockets now, people are just being depressed together, and suicide talk is popular.
Right. Yeah.
So this is empathizing
Yeah.
with other people, but it is not intellectually empathizing. With the intellectual, you have the critical thinking dimension.
Mhm.
And then you say, what is this doing to my mind?
Mhm.
And life is short. I mean, even at minimum, do you want to be filling it with a lot of things that make you feel down? That's a choice that we have.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I can even a case of my own, in that I remember the first comedy I ever saw in which part of the humor involved someone being murdered, and I was just appalled, and I just didn't want to watch anymore, and it kind of ruined the rest of the movie for me. But there's so many comedies now since then in which someone gets murdered, sometimes with blood, and becomes so ubiquitous that I've become more or less inured to it unless it's really in my face. So if it's just someone being shot, uh, I, I can still kind of enjoy the movie. That's not always the case. I mean, I don't get any pleasure out of horror movies, and serious tragedies also bother me. I mean, I don't like that everybody dies at the end of Hamlet. Thinking, right? I mean, there's this depressed guy and he's killing people and they're killing him. And I don't know. And really the effect on me. Yeah.
Yes. And that's related to, it reminds me of the classics. Many of the classics within literature, especially novels, are very depressing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to ask yourself how much of that
Yeah.
do you want to read? And
Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
To me, it's just going to depend a whole lot on a lot of factors about you individually as a person, because some people react to this with no problem at all. Sometimes they laugh at horror movies, but even those who don't laugh at horror movies, who feel genuine fear or terror, maybe it conceptualizes in their mind like riding a scary roller coaster, right? You're going through the fear, but there's something heady about being in the fear and knowing it's going to end in 2 hours. And so I think it depends on a whole lot of factors. And so there's a great amount of complexity in how we react to things, because though I can still find humor in movies which have murders in them, I don't think I'm any closer to committing a murder than I was before, or being indifferent to someone else's actual murder. Yeah.
No, I think it has to do with that. On that point, how much time is there and how much time do you want to spend in certain pockets of thought and entertainment in this case, as you're defining it or describing it. And it's also important to remember, as I hope I mentioned, that people are different. Just because I was affected in this way or am affected doesn't mean other people will be. And I said, we need to make sure that we're commanding minds. And so if you're doing something that is bothering you, if you're doing something that's making you feel more depressed, if you're going to these suicide websites, and all of you are feeling down together, how is that helping you? And so every case has to be taken differently and separately. And you have to, again, the main thing is the command of your point of view. Know your point of view, command your point of view, command your thinking, and don't hide from it. So somebody who's joining us right now might be saying, well, you know, that I kind of feel that way too about these programs. I don't really like them. They kind of bother me and they get into my psyche. And I don't really want to watch this anymore, but my partner wants to. So I'm going to have to, so I guess I'll just keep having to do it. No, you don't have to do it. You can do something else. You can tell your partner, I'm sorry, but I decided I can no longer do that. This is one of the beauties of critical thinking. You can learn something and then you can change.
Right. And
so that's what we want.
And part of not being in the prison is you could make either decision or somewhere in the middle, right? You reflect on it and you can say, well, this is important to my partner. And so I'm going, even though I don't enjoy it, I'm going to do that in the spirit of being with the other person. Or I can say, no, I really don't want to do that. I really want to do this other thing. So one of the things critical thinking gives you is a great range of choices, a great range of activities.
Well, Gerald, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's it. That's it.
Well, I've enjoyed this as always.
Yeah, me too.
Now we must go and focus on point of view and make sure we're all expanding our point of view so that we're becoming more critical and we are increasingly embracing the intellectual virtues. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Good night, Linda.